I'm Greg DePalma, and you're listening to Prime Sports Golf, brought to you by ProGolfWeekly.com, Covers.com, and UWager.eu with Jeff Shane, Brady Cannon, and Joel Cook on the Prime Sports Radio Network. On today's show, we're going to preview the final Masters tune-up event in Houston with player analysis, course knowledge, the latest odds and picks, as well as more Masters coverage, including the latest odds. Also discuss how boring match play can get on the weekend and why PGA Tour officials have got to stop screwing around with players and messed up point totals. That's Prime Sports Golf, as Prime Sports Network starts now. Is in bloom, transmissions will resume. Now try to push, try to keep us all down, and hope that we will never see the truth around. All right, thanks again for joining us for another great week of golf coverage, along with our media partners at ProGolfWeekly.com and Covers.com. For this Tuesday, the 27th of March, 2018, 7 of the top 30 players from the official World Golf Rankings, led by number 4 Jordan Spieth, are in the field this week at the Houston Open from the Golf Club of Houston near Humble, Texas, with Russell Henley, the defending champ. This is the last chance for players not exempt for the Masters to play their way in. Before we get started on breaking down the field, make sure to follow us on Twitter at PrimeSN. You can receive our latest opinions, on-demand programming alerts, including when every show is available on demand. And don't forget, if you're looking for somewhere to wager and get fast, reliable payouts, click on the UWager banner on our site. Get started with wagering this week on the Houston Open. Get an early jump on wagering next week's Masters with a special $100 risk-free wager if you sign up this week when you make a $100 minimum deposit. Time to introduce my co-host to the show. He's a PGAtour.com contributor. You can find his first look reports every Friday prior to each event on the PGA Tour. Jeff Shane. And Jeff, with Bubba winning for the second time this season, and he's got 2 green jackets, so he now has to be considered one of the top favorites for next week's Masters, or at least that's what you would think. I've already looked at the odds. He is not one of the top 3 or 5 favorites, but that could change over the next couple of days or the next week. So I'm going to ask you straight out, Jeff, if you were making the odds for Augusta right now, you were in charge, which players would be the top 3 favorites in order? And would one of those players be Bubba?
Bubba Watson might be the hottest golfer on the planet right now. I think my top 3, to answer your question directly, I think I would have Justin Thomas at number 1.
Really?
Yes.
Okay.
He's playing well. He seems to now be at a point where he is adaptable to just about any course. He is a major champion. In fact, he can win back-to-back major championships with this. I think Justin Thomas would be number 1. I'll put McIlroy at 2, based on the performance that he had at Arnold Palmer, and that's the last we've seen of him. But I think maybe something has fallen into place. And yes, Bubba Watson at number 3, because he has looked really strong in the last 6 weeks.
All right, let's introduce our next guest coming up. As we our first segment every week is always going to be inside the event, and it's this week inside Houston, brought to you by Covers.com. Covers has the best handicapping data on the web for all major sports, including golf. Make sure to visit Covers Experts at experts.covers.com. For a limited time only, you get 50% off any purchase by using the promo code PRIME50. That's PRIME50. Welcome back, Covers.com, golf handicapper Brady Cannon. And Brady, same question. Your top 3, if you were there in Vegas, you were posting the odds, favorite top 3 for the Masters.
Well, I'll tell you what, Bubba Watson is pretty close. He's down to 14-1. Before he won last week, he was pretty much around 20-1 around town. Now been bet down to 14-1, and that's pretty close to a top 3. You've got Spieth at 12, Dustin Johnson and Rory and Thomas at 10. Tiger, I believe, is around 9. I guess he's to 10 now. But as you mentioned, Jeff, Bubba Watson's awful close. My top 3, I'll agree with Jeff, and I'll put Justin Thomas in there. He was a little bit rattled in the semifinal match against Bubba at Austin Country Club last weekend because of the well-publicized story now that the thought of becoming the number one player in the world kind of got into his head a little bit. I think he's going to be able to, get rid of that and extricate that, little anomaly he felt there and be able to focus on this golf tournament solely. So I would probably put him at, somewhere in the neighborhood of 12-1, maybe 10-1. And then the other two guys that I really like are Justin Rose and Phil Mickelson. Justin Rose has really been as hot as anybody in the world for the past 6 months or so. And Mickelson, winning in Mexico, put together a pretty good week at the match play. He certainly knows this golf course and has been putting about better than anybody in the world right now. So I would put all these guys probably in the neighborhood of 12 to 15-1. I really don't think anybody deserves to be less than 10-1 with the quality of the field that we have here. Pretty tough to make somebody less than 10-1, in my opinion.
Hey, well, look, I mean, I give you credit for going after a couple of guys. And look, Jeff's got Bubba, you've got Rose and Phil Mickelson. And we all know that maybe this is part of the I don't know. I mean, Vegas themselves would never put Rose, Phil, or Bubba as the top three. They're just not going to do that. That's why I wanted to ask you guys, because there is a difference between what you like and what you think. But I'm with you guys. I mean, there is a correlation to it, though. What you like and what you think sometimes. Obviously, you got to be in the industry long enough to also understand the difference of the two, and I know you guys do. But yeah.
Well, Greg, it goes back to what we've talked about on this show before with Tiger. Tiger's true odds may be around 20-1.
Sure.
But the book has to list him at 10-1 because of the action they're taking in on Tiger and to protect themselves. If they listed Tiger at 30-1 right now, they'd get killed. They would have so much exposure
if he
on
wins.
Tiger money.
Yeah.
And it's the same thing, Jordan Spieth is that way, and Dustin Johnson and Rory McIlroy. So, those guys kind of have to be positioned at the top of the board for the casino's interest. But the odds maker will also tell you, as you allude to, their true odds may be something different.
Yeah, and that's why the guys that you've talked about, again, throwing in Bubba, Rose, and Phil, these guys realistically, if you throw out all the noise, the outward noise that you just mentioned, these guys should be near the top of the leaderboard. That's why right now bargains should include. I mean, Phil is still 17-1 at UWager. Bubba, so far, anybody at UWager, we haven't seen the drop there yet. So maybe you want to take advantage if you're listening, because he's still 22-1 at UWager. That's if you like Bubba. So you got guys, you got Casey at 25-1, Rose at 14. They're not in the top 5. So there's still some bargains out there with these guys that you've mentioned, the Bubbas, the Roses, and the Mickelsons, that should be as equal as any of the top players. And I noticed that you guys did not mention Dustin Johnson, who, by the way, is, I'm sure he's one of the co-favorites at a lot of places.
Yeah, but I also think if we were anybody that was paying attention to what was going on in Austin, all of a sudden has to think, what's going on with Dustin?
Yep.
And the ironic thing is, of course, that he had everything firing a year ago, except for his socks on the stairs, and maybe lost his best chance at winning the Masters to this point. But he doesn't have the form right now, not compared to these other guys with all these stars lining up in the last 6 weeks, 7 weeks.
Yeah, it's going to be an incredible week next week, and we certainly, who knows? I mean, after the first day of the leaderboard, none of these guys will be up there. All right.
Well, I wouldn't be surprised to see Dustin right there when it matters either. I mean, this guy is still the number one player in the world and still has the ability to do it. But like Jeff says, it was odd what happened to him at the match play as the defending champion, nonetheless. But I did hear some rumblings of possibly him feeling a bit ill. We'll see if he's healthy coming in next week.
All right, now this week's event in Houston, the Golf Club of Houston, they've been playing on the tournament course since 2006, so keep that in mind. What should we know about this golf course then, Brady? When you look at some of the former champions, I mean, most of them you seem to get, well, obviously you get a lot of long shots, and I say obviously because of the fact that it's so close to the Masters. Matter of fact, I believe there's only 16 players that are going to play this week and next week. And that's the way it is. No major winners have won here last 6 years, and they get major winners here, and they've got them again this week, but they haven't won here the last 6 years, and 9 of the last 10. The only guy who's won a major in his career that has won at Houston, and there's been a lot of them that have played here the week before the Masters, is Phil Mickelson in 2011. So how do you try to, how do you work that into just your normal, well, this is how the golf course sets up, and this is the type of course it favors? How do you throw in that compared to the fact that a lot of these big-time players might not even care what they score this week?
That's a great point, Greg, and that is exactly the dilemma you face this week as a handicapper, and that's why I'm taking the week off. No, I am taking the week off, however, to get ready for the Masters, as that always takes a lot of time. But you're spot on there with your analysis. It's as much of a mental evaluation this week as it is statistical. You have to wonder, is Phil there? I mean, he has admittedly taken, roots in some of these holes to where he feels he'll set himself up for a shot that he figures he'll have to play next week at Augusta. So he does look at it as a glorified practice round. And we should also state for the listeners that this course is designed intentionally and set up intentionally to look a lot like Augusta. You have larger than average tour size greens, faster than average tour speed on the greens. You have the runoff areas that are shaved to look like Augusta, wide fairways with very little rough. So it is set up to give the players a little bit of a preview and make it an attractive stop on tour prior to going to Augusta. So you're right. Do these guys look at it as a practice round? Do they have their foot on the gas the entire time to really try and win this event? That's a tough part to figure out. Now, from a purely statistical standpoint, these longer shots that we've seen win recently, one thing they do share in common is doing very well in greens in regulation and also their par 4 scoring. Now, also I mentioned the similarities to Augusta. They're going to have to putt well and they're going to have to scramble well. We know those skill sets translate to Augusta, and they will here this week too. So, a couple of different handicaps you have to make this week, statistical and emotional, and that makes it pretty tough.
Yeah, and not any easier to try to figure out which of the players are going to have good weeks with the putter, and of course with some of those statistics. That's the hard part, especially when you take a look at 3 of the players that have won here in the last 5 years: D.A. Points, Matt Jones, and Jim Herman. I mean, these guys, Points had 7 missed cuts and 9 coming in. Jones had not had a top 10 on the year coming in, and Herman was ranked 189th coming in with 1 top 20 in his 8 events coming in. So that just shows you how difficult it is to handicap this week's event with some of these long shots mixed in with the Russell Henley types, like those borderline guys, maybe right outside the top 50, that do need to win to get into the Masters. Which is something that Russell Henley was able to do. So do you have anything for us as far as, I know you said you were taking the week off, so do you have anything for us as far as anybody that you would target this week, or are you advising everybody to just, save your money for the Masters?
No, I'm still writing my articles and still taking a look at the event and all that type of thing. So I've definitely done some studying up on who's going to, likely have a good week here in Houston. And I'll tell you one guy that across the board looks really good in the stats is Rafa Cabrera Bello. He's very strong from tee to green, hits a lot of greens in regulation, 6th on tour in that category, and number 1 on tour in proximity to the hole. With these big greens, it's going to matter getting it close to the hole, and he's a very good putter as well. So Cabrera Bello, certainly one of the better players in the field here this week, and his stats are there to match. I also like Charles Howell. He had a real nice week in Austin at the match play, finished 9th there, and he's had good history here at Houston in the past with 3 top 10s in the past 5 years. Playing very good golf. I think Howell's another guy to keep an eye on.
Okay. Any matches that you like? Did you look around at some of the matchups for the first round that might have intrigued you, or
Well, I'm sorry. I have to come clean there. I did not look at the matchups because I am taking the week off in that regard. But, yeah, I definitely did some breakdown on some of these guys and, you know, the stats that I gave you that I think are key. And, you know, you don't have, as you mentioned, Greg, you don't have a ton of star power. And so I would probably look to go against that if you're betting the future market or even the matchups. Because you wonder for those 19 or 20 guys or 16 or whatever it is that are going to be going to Augusta next week, pretty tough to handicap their mental state this week. So maybe look at those longer shots on both the futures board and in the matchups.
Wouldn't be a bad idea. All right, Brady. So enjoy this last week tune-up because the Masters 1 week, it only comes around once. And by the way, next week I know that we're going to be doing some special shows. We'll do a Saturday show, a Sunday show. What do you do during Masters week? Are you just like glued to? Did you go online at all, or how do you take in the Masters? Last year was the first time I actually went online. And I was kind of, I don't know, some of it was okay, some of it wasn't, because you kind of do get you have to go with the groups that they give you, which sometimes, okay, I can do without. But what do you do? Do you just kind of relax and wait for the TV coverage to come on, or you go all in?
One thing I don't do is a lot of work. I have a tough time getting any work done.
No focus.
Masters. But no, it's certainly one of my favorite sporting events of the entire year. I just love it. And after all the hard work that you put in and all the preparation and the anticipation, it's really nice to get to Masters Thursday and just let it roll from there on out. I will be doing a radio show on VSiN, the Vegas Stats and Information Network, on Sunday morning. Prior to the final round coverage, and then after the final round, or when the final round coverage begins, I'll probably get together with some buddies and take it in at a sports book or something like that.
There you go. Sounds like a plan. Brady, appreciate it. Hopefully we'll get a final round Tiger and Phil. How about that?
I'll take it, man. You guys have fun. I look forward to speaking with you next week.
Awesome. Thanks, Brady. All right, that's Brady Cannon, Covers, and once again, you can check out Brady and all the other experts at Covers. It's at experts.covers.com, and once again, use promo code PRIME50. That's PRIME50 to get that 50% off purchase. All right, so by the way, 23 playoffs all time at the Houston Open, Jeff. That is the most of any event on tour, with the exception of majors, because there is a major in there, the U.S. Open. It has more. But considering how many playoffs we've had this year, and the Houston Open being the event outside the majors with the most playoffs all time, you think we'll get a playoff?
I'd say the chances are pretty good. And for two guys, that maybe not marquee names, but remember what's at stake if you get into a playoff. All of a sudden, it's one hole for a Masters invitation, or, 2 holes for a Masters invitation, whatever it is. That's as good a drama as almost as you find with, trying to win a major or something like that. Again, the names may not be exactly marquee value, but for those guys, grinding with a Masters invitation on the line, that's some pressure.
Yeah, it is. And I mean, one of those players that thought he was already in and now he's going to have to win to get in is Ian Poulter. And Ian was not very happy when he thought he was in. I mean, they told him he was in. And then just before he was going out there, he wins the group. And we talked about this last week on the show. Watch out for Ian Poulter if he comes out of the group, how dangerous he could be because of how good of a match play player he is. So he comes out of the group, and you're figuring, watch out for Ian Poulter. He gets told he's going to be in the Masters, and then all of a sudden, just before he gets out there to play his match against Kevin Kisner, he is told he is not in the Masters, and he's got to keep going. And that could not have been a coincidence compared to how poorly he played.
Yeah, I think there was definitely a wind out of the sails moment right there. And, the odd thing about it was, is if you were watching the Golf Channel coverage on Friday and even on Saturday morning, they were saying, well, Ian needs to get to Sunday. He needs to get to the semifinals to get into the Masters. And that was the consistent storyline all the way through Friday and through Saturday morning. And so I don't know what necessarily happened between the end of his Saturday morning match and the first tee Saturday afternoon, because at some point, and it's hard to know who to blame. I suppose it would be PGA Tour officials or those with the World Golf Rankings, but all of a sudden the word started floating around, no, Ian's in now. Ian's going to be number 50. And then all of a sudden somebody started crunching numbers again, because you can't really know what the scenario is until everybody's results are in, because not only is it your potential points, but who won, who lost, potential points for those players around you. And so at some point, shortly before the start of the afternoon matches, somebody, I wouldn't want to be that guy, somebody went up to Ian Poulter, and I understand Ian Poulter, when he was talking to reporters, said, "Are you sure? Are you sure?" And they said, "Yes, we've been told that you're in." And so complete miscommunication somewhere. I don't want to be the guy that went up on the first tee and say, "Ian, you got to win this one too. Otherwise, you're going to be number 51." I do think it came out of sales. And I think it's one of those things where, when in doubt, hedge.
Yeah.
Don't say you're definitely in. Say there's a fair chance, but you want to make sure, win this match. And go in with that mentality, because I think there was a definite impact on what happened with Ian Poulter on Saturday.
Well, wasn't it like around this time last year where there was this other situation that happened with the whole point system? And
yes,
and who was involved with that?
That had to do with FedEx Cup points. And remember, Ian Poulter was coming back from a foot injury, so he had taken a medical extension.
Yep.
And when you take an extension, you have X number of starts to whatever the average number of PGA Tour starts is. You have X number of starts to earn enough FedEx Cup points to be the equivalent of number 125. And so Poulter went through April and got down to a very small number of starts, and was very, very close, and fell short of the FedEx Cup points required for keeping his card.
Mm-hmm.
But then, thanks to Brian Gay, and specifically his wife, Kimberly Gay, Brian was in the same boat. He took a medical extension, needed to earn so many points, but it was Kimberly that realized, wait a minute, this is the first year that only FedEx Cup points are being used, but we're comparing to 2012 when the money list was also a factor. And so by computing the money won and comparing it to what would have kept a card back in 2016, it turns out both Brian Gay and Ian Poulter, by that statute, in the last year of its existence, both of them were able to keep their cards. It was a completely unique situation where everybody mentally had discarded the money list,
yep,
except it was in effect for medical extensions last year.
Well, I mean, to have this happen over the past year and a half, and to have it happen to the same person, I mean, that's
the ironic thing, is that it always happens to Ian Poulter, it seems.
Yeah, and I don't know. I don't know what you can do to make this a little bit more clear. You would think that they would have some sort of computer system set up. Hey, the computer don't lie. And I'm even, at least we're excusing what happened last year, because like, okay, there's some changes, and all right, maybe they didn't put this formula into that formula, but for this to happen to Ian this year, I'm not sure where the excuse is from. Shouldn't there be a system that should be ironclad hey, it's in the computer. We've worked the numbers. You're in or you're out. What's the problem here? What's going on?
Well, and I think that's where the hedging would have worked. Ian was an early finisher on Saturday morning. And so whoever was crunching numbers might have had to take an assumption, and I'm guessing. But at some point, when all the results were in, something flipped. Somebody who was ahead of him lost, or probably more likely ahead of him won, or behind him won, to earn enough points to keep it really, really interesting. And I think that's where, again, I think if you just told Ian, look, you're really, really close, or just don't say anything at all, because it's a moving target with every round.
Sure.
Who survived?
Yeah.
Who's done?
Yeah.
It might be better just to say, to not say anything until every match is finished.
Sure.
And all the numbers are double checked.
Yep.
And
just
honestly,
like a scorecard.
in a situation like you've got a morning round of matches, an afternoon round of matches, let the guy concentrate on what's in front of him and not bring the white noise in to confuse things. Same way with Justin Thomas. Now, his situation didn't change. It was always, if Justin gets to the championship match, he will go to number one. And that never changed. But even Justin very specifically said, I went out Saturday morning and I could not get number one out of my head. And all of a sudden, somebody who had been perhaps the other dominant golfer of the entire week just fell flat.
Yeah, I don't, this is, I've heard Andrea, our tennis analyst and former tennis professional, say this before, and she talks a lot about the rankings, a lot about number one, and, this is definitely a player's thing, because and I try to understand where they're coming from. You're not playing professionally in any sport, but playing sports, try to figure it out. And okay, sure, being number one's great. I can be number one. That's great. But I don't know if I would ever put that much stock in that type of a situation. I mean, after a match is done, after an event is over, hey, am I number one this week? I'm sitting at home. The news comes over the wire. I'm number one. Great. Oh, I'm waiting for a phone call to tell me I'm sitting at home. Luxury of my home. Phone call comes in. I'm waiting for it. I can get a little nervous. Oh, I'm number one. But to let that distract you when you're in the middle of an event about whether you're number one or not. I mean, I'm sorry. I don't understand what they're doing. I don't know why that should distract these kids.
Well, but I think that's part of of how the brain works, and it's people like me and you, or I'll even leave you out of the equation. People like me who will go up and say, hey, if you win this week, you'll be number one. What will that mean? And Justin Thomas has talked about, he wanted to win a tournament. He wanted to be a multiple winner. Go through the checklist. I want to win a major. I want to win multiple majors. I want to be number one. Well, all of a sudden, it's right in front of you. And everybody knows that's a big goal of yours, and we got stories to write and things to talk about, and we're interested in his thought process. And so it becomes part of the equation, and it's the mature player that is able to compartmentalize, to be able to set it aside, and in the end, I think we all realize, but you have to have it, kind of in your active mind. If I go take care of what I need to do, everything else falls into place. But the human brain is an amazingly complex, convoluted, confusing thing. And sometimes it's hard to not push that to the back of your mind. I've also heard from players that have been number one, that once you get there and you've achieved it and it's great, then the next time you're in that situation, it's not weighing on your mind anymore. It's like that first time.
Yeah.
It's a career accomplishment.
Sure.
And so Justin Thomas learns his lesson. He goes out and he wins the Masters, certainly he'll go to number one if he wins the Masters, possibly even if he finishes top 3 at the Masters. He's going to go to number one. I think it may be easier for him at the Masters because he's going to focus on winning a green jacket, and number one's just going to be out there.
Well, the other thing, too, is, and okay, it's nice that you're number one, like you said, for the first time ever. That's great. But that number one could be taken away from you the very next week. If the other guy at number 2 plays good, you don't. So for me, while it would be nice to be number one, I would be a lot more worried about being number one at the end of the year. That would be a much more important accomplishment. The season's over. Who's number one in the world with the season? Am I it? Can I sit there for months knowing I'm number one? That would be, to me, that would be a lot more important than, I'm number one during the season and I can quickly change in a couple of days. So
yeah, but the maturity factor is part of that, and I think that if you were to ask any young player, being number one at any point of your career is a huge thing, even if it's for 1 week. Tom Lehman was number one in the world for a single week in 1996, but you know what? He's still counted among that handful of elite players that was able to reach number one in the world, and it means something to him now that he's pushing 60.
Well, speaking of the match play on Sunday, because Thomas wasn't there, and maybe we needed a Thomas Watson final, but it didn't work out, and the results were the results, and that was not what everybody was looking for. So you throw in the blowout match, and you got the worst possible match play Sunday that the networks could have imagined. And this happens, but this is something that happens maybe more than it doesn't happen with this formula. And I've mentioned this before about wanting to potentially in this situation. Remember, we talked about, well, if you have this one match play, that's fine, but maybe it'd be a good idea to have another match play, sort of like what they do in Europe when they, 16? I think they have. So maybe you get a 16, and maybe the 16 are the 16 best players. And this way, no matter who's going up against each other in the final, are going to be 2 stars out on the golf course. 2 guys that you can relate to. 2 guys that are going to draw fans to the TV seats. But other than that, you're left with this combined with the blowout. And I'm sorry, but I can't imagine many people were tuning in to that one on Sunday.
Yeah, I guess it depends on where you are in terms of being a golf fan. And match play, like a tennis tournament, sometimes you get to the weekend at the French Open and you're saying, who are these players? But they made their way through the brackets. They won their matches, and it is what it is. Is Loyola of Chicago this week a Cinderella or somebody that nobody cares about because nobody can name a single player? The most famous person at Loyola Chicago is Sister Jean. How does that play in a viewer's mind? Is Kevin Kisner, who's a really tough player and very underrated match play player, why isn't he Cinderella? Would Alex Noren have been Cinderella? It's all, I think, in the eye of the beholder. And if you're a golf fan, you know who Kevin Kisner is, and you like the matchup. You also, if you were paying attention too, you could see how gassed Kevin Kisner was at the end of his semifinal match against Noren. Well, Bubba was fresh, and I could see a blowout a mile away. But I think it's all in the eye of the beholder. If you're a fan of more than the top dozen players in the world rankings, give or take, then Kevin Kisner as a quote-unquote Cinderella seems like a really interesting deal. If you are a casual golf fan who only knows the names of the top dozen players in the world, then you think it's disappointing. if somebody who's not a college basketball fan decides to tune in on Saturday, is the presence of Loyola Chicago invigorating or disappointing? Good question.
All right. Well, Joel, what do you think? You do you buy that that a Kevin Kisner Bubba Watson match would be appealing for that reason, or not?
Well, I'm sorry, I just got in a second ago. You mean of the Cinderella argument?
Yeah, I mean, Kevin Kisner, Bubba Watson. Does anybody want to watch that? And
really.
you buy into potentially it being, underdog. Can Kevin Kisner knock off Bubba Watson kind of deal?
Not really. Maybe it's because I pay attention enough to the stuff where I already know Kevin Kisner is at the very least an above average golfer. I would have seen it more as if Poulter don't go another round. He's already a great player, but he's ranked lower. Or Cameron Smith, maybe if one of them had gone through instead. I mean, kids is not. I mean, I don't know. It was really exciting, and people know who Bubba Watson is, at least. It just didn't seem like can this guy upset this guy? I know their rankings were pretty similar, and I know it's just Kisner had to do a lot before that match. I guess it must have exhausted him.
I don't know. I guess if there would have been, I guess maybe a true Cinderella would have been somebody that would have really been down the rankings, like you said. Maybe somebody that wasn't really, or who knows, maybe one of those Japanese players playing in the event. That could have been maybe more of a true Cinderella. But I don't know. Like I was saying to Jeff before you came on, I think, and I've said this a few years ago, I think what they should either think of doing is having a 16-man match play and make sure that those 16 are 16 of the top players in the world. So you're never going to have a bad final matchup. Or if you're going to keep this one, then have two of them. Then have another 16-man later on in the season. So at least we get the experience of the setup that we're all hoping to get, which we just don't seem to get enough.
Yeah, and that's a really interesting idea. I hadn't even considered that. Yeah, two of the last three finals under this new format that's pretty lousy. That Jason Day Lewis was never really in doubt either. I mean, we had a good streak on before that. The day Dubison won, Hunter Mahan against Rory McIlroy. But yeah, it's in this format they're going at now, is just some guys get to play a lot more than others, and it's tiring at this level. That's an interesting idea going for two of them during the course of the year. I really like that. Yeah, either one of those I think would be an improvement, because that was not very gripping on Sunday. It was a little bit for me watching Justin Thomas and the other one, but overall, yeah, I'm sure the ratings weren't great for it.
All right, so let's go ahead and get into breaking down the Houston Open and the odds. Joel, you got the first pick this week, so let's run through these picks, and then we'll do some analysis afterwards. By the way, as I mentioned before, 16 players will be playing this week and next week. And that's interesting because, as I also mentioned before, even out of all the major champs that have played here over those years, especially since they've been here at the Golf Club of Houston since 2006, only one of the last 10 winners of the Houston Open have been a former major champ. That was Phil Mickelson in 2011. And by the way, Phil is the last player also to win back-to-back the Houston Open. Back-to-back before the Masters, but it wasn't the Houston Open. It was when he won the Bell South Classic. So he's the last player to win back-to-back, which it might have something to do with why these 16 players, which are a lot of those 16 players that are playing this week, that will be playing next week, are a lot of the top guys or guys that have names, recognition, guys that we might pick next week, whether it's as a favorite or a sleeper. So keep in mind that when you're thinking of picking them this week, that they just have other things on their mind, Jeff, as we've talked about, and that's why it's if there's ever an event during the season that does have top players in it, which we do. We've got Rose, Fowler, Stenson, Spieth, and Mickelson. The fact is that if there's a week to not take those guys like we normally do, this is the week.
Yeah, it's just very hard to kind of figure out where everybody is. And I think it's one of those things where I don't think anybody wants to go in out of form, miss the cut, anything like that. And they will play well enough to get to Saturday, and they may continue to tinker a little bit on Saturday. But I tell you what, if they're somewhere close on Sunday, I think their focus snaps to the present. I can get a PGA Tour win out of this. And if you can get them all lined up on Sunday, it's great. It's just who's going to get there because they're working on other stuff here and there. Brady mentioned Phil Mickelson. We've talked about it where he's hitting shots that he thinks he needs for Augusta. And if they get him what he wants at Houston, great. And if not, he'll take a hit. That makes Phil very difficult to factor in, although he's won this event before. What do you do?
All right, well, that's what we have to think about. So, Joel, you've got the first pick. Who are you going to go with?
Well, I'm pretty tempted by Mickelson just because of his recent hits here. That kind of worries me too. Is he's not someone you really see as trying to necessarily win this. And I think that's why I'm going to take Justin Rose ahead of him. Not that he doesn't have a lot to focus on with his runner-up finish at the Masters last year, but I think he's just been so solid everywhere lately. Statistically, it's been incredible. I'm gonna ride that one. I think if he's in it, he's more likely to try to keep focused on this tournament.
All right, Justin Rose up there with Ricky Fowler as the co-favorites at 10-1. So you'll take Rose. Jeff, you're next.
I'm thinking along the same lines as Joel here, and the fact that Mickelson has won this event, and in something that's kind of a dice roll anyway, Mickelson wants to continue to be effective. I'll give him a ride here.
All right, let's see if Phil Mickelson could possibly win back-to-back events again. He's sitting there at 12-1, by the way. So there's 5 players between 10 and 12-1, and Phil and Justin are 2 of them. I'm going to go with another one, and I'm going to go with Henrik Stenson at 12-1. Stenson has a good resume here, 2 runner-ups and a third-place finish, almost won a few weeks ago. So I'll take Henrik, and not to say that Henrik doesn't want to win the Masters, but Henrik is not normally a big-time Masters player. So I'll take Henrik Stenson as my top pick. Joel, who's your second play?
I'm going to go down the list a little bit. Usually I'm not comfortable going with the repeat champ, but I mean, Russell Henley is just so good at this course. I mean, I kind of feel like Berger at the St. Jude or something. Just, I think he's been the top 5 with the last 3 years. He's been way too solid here, and he's actually playing decent lately, aside from a terrible weekend in Mexico. At 33-1 odds for how well he's been playing, I don't want to try to risk him falling to my next spot.
All right, 4 straight finishes here of 7th or better for Russell Henley, including the win last year. Jeff, you're next.
I'm going to actually take a little bit of Brady's advice. He liked Rafa Cabrera-Bello, and there may be an advantage to not having made it to the weekend because you get some rest. And we can talk about scheduling at some other time, but I'm not sure that the match play 2 weeks before the Masters is exactly a wise idea, but Cabrera-Bello was 3rd in Mexico in his previous start before Austin.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and follow the Russell Henley move and take Daniel Berger here. Berger has finished 5th the last 2 years, so and has been solid here the last 3. So I'll take Berger at 25-1 as my second choice. Joel, your third choice?
As tempted as I am by Spieth here, just looking at the odds at this point, someone there I just like better. Tony Finau, I think, is a fantastic fit for this course. He's been a little boom or bust lately, but even last week he didn't get past pool play, but he was still 2-1, and I believe his loss was a close. Yeah, one up there was one down to Alex Noren. So there's no shame in that. I think he's headed the right way. He's a fantastic figure. I really like him at 28-1 odds.
All right, Tony Finau, runner-up at the Genesis earlier this year. Jeff, your third choice.
All right, I'm going to take the guy who's actually coming in here off of victory and needs a victory this week to maybe get a long shot berth into the Masters. We'll see if Steve Stricker, who has 2 wins in 3 Champions Tour events and has played pretty darn well on the regular tour as well, can throw a Hail Mary here.
All right, Steve Stricker, who's got a pretty decent resume at this golf course. 4th PGA Tour event of the year and 12th last time out. Why not? Steve Stricker at 40-1. All right, I'm going to go ahead and I tell you what, I am going to take a guy who I think is going to be pretty pumped to play this week, and I'm going to go ahead and take Ian Poulter at 80-1. Why not? Ian was playing pretty well at match play and had a pretty decent season last season. Let's not forget, including having a very good Open Championship. So maybe he's starting to round into form, and maybe with that chip on his shoulder, maybe he'll be able to get off to a good start and carry it through if he knows he needs to win to get to the Masters. Long shot officially, Joel. Who are you going to go with?
It's actually not a tremendous group around the fringe this week. Pretty tough choice. I don't think there's an obvious candidate, but the one that stands out to me that I kind of like the most is Jamie Lovemark at 60-1. He's never, he's going to be motivated to go to the Masters, having not played before, but he's done well in the tournament before. He was third round leader. He was 54-hole leader 2 years ago, and his results have been improving recently. I think he's a great fit for the course also. I'm going to go with him at 60-1.
60-1, Jamie Lovemark. He's been playing pretty well recently. Jeff, who's your long shot? Again, these are players 50-1 or higher.
I was really impressed with how Charles Howell played last week and actually beat Phil Mickelson in group play. And I think that he's another kind of horse for this course. And he is an Augusta native, too. So he's got plenty of incentive to get back there.
All right, Charles Howell it is. He's got 2 top 10s in his last 3 and 3 overall here on this golf course. So Charles Howell is your long shot. I'm going to go ahead and go back to somebody I've taken a bunch of times in the past year, and I think it's a good time to take him again because he's coming off a 22nd place finish last week, 7th at Bay Hill, and he's made 6 straight cuts, and that's the most he's made since fall of 2015. I'll go with Patrick Rodgers at 80-1. So a second straight 80-1 shot for me, Patrick Rodgers. Your first alternate, Joel. These are the players under the 50-1 mark that are still left on the board.
Okay, so about 4 of them left.
Well, we've got Ricky Fowler at 10-1, Spieth at 12-1. We've got Luke List. We've got Matt Kuchar and Benny On and Jason Duffner.
The 2 guys there, for some reason, I assumed were getting taken. I like Luke List. I've been hearing a lot about this week. He was third in this tournament last year. He wasn't too good at the match play last week, so that's really hard to compare that form to another. So I'm trying not to focus too much on it. So I'll go with him. He's a good. I think as an alternate, his odds are not great for having never won on tour, but he seems to like him. He's playing well lately.
All right, Luke List, who's playing better than he ever has, that's for sure. Yeah, don't worry about match play too much. Before that, 3 straight top 20s, including the runner-up finish. Okay, third here last year. Jeff, who is your number 1 alternate?
Well, and remember that Luke List is going to be able to play with a putter this week. So,
that'll help.
That might have changed his entire week if he hadn't damaged his putter in the opening round.
Sure.
My alternate is going to be Matt Kuchar. I think that he's one of those guys that may play things a little bit straighter than some of the other players that are preparing for the Masters.
All right, Kuchar was the playoff loser to Matt Jones a few years ago. I'll go with Benny On. Benny On's got 4 top 25s in his last 5 worldwide, including the 5th at the Honda. So Benny On at 40-1 is my number 1 alternate. And again, that's in case one of our top 3 picks fail to tee it up on Thursday. And now if our long shot fails to tee it up, alternate long shot pick, Joel.
Those guys made me not look all that smart recently because it seems like every time I hype him up, he has a bad week. John in Vegas, I think he's the kind of player who should flourish well here. I know he's not coming in great form, but he's kind of that guy that just out of nowhere just suddenly blows up, and I can see it being this week again. At those odds, I like him 80-1.
80-1 for Johnny Vegas. All right, couple top 20s here the last 2 years. Jeff, your alternate long shot?
I'm going to dive a little bit deeper here. And for anybody that was paying attention to the event in the Dominican Republic last week, the alternate event, you might have recognized the name, who was also a leader at the Arnold Palmer Invitational, or was it the Valspar? Anyway, he's getting onto leaderboards, and Houston is one of those where sometimes you just come out of nowhere. But Corey Connors at 125-1 is going to be my second alternate.
All right. I was thinking maybe you were going to go with Kelly Kraft there because he was also third last week and eighth not too long ago, and he's been also playing well. The problem that I'm having with Connors, and I was looking at him too, was just the fact that, I mean, it's the obvious fact, he's having some bad Sundays. So 77 at Valspar, 76 last week. He's got to start getting rid of those jitters on Sunday. So maybe if he's there again this week, maybe it'll finally calm him down and he'll be able to finish the job this time. I'm going to go ahead and go to 100-1 shot. Take a guy that I haven't taken in a long time, and that is Rory Sabatini. 8 straight cuts for Rory, 5 top 35s in his last 8, 5th at the Valspar, and he's moved in that stretch from being ranked 366th worldwide to 191st. So Rory Sabatini is starting to play some pretty good golf, and I think he's a pretty decent long shot at 100-1. All right, let's see. Any other players? I mean, we did not go with Sharma. Sharma's at 66-1. He's the Race to Dubai leader. He could be a very intriguing play this week. He seems to be especially now that he's also been able to get some PGA Tour time out there. We would think that the more he does, the easier it'll be for him. So he could be interesting. Let's see, Chris Kirk, Bud Cauley. Those are a couple of guys I was looking at as long shots. And maybe Ryan Palmer is another long shot. You know, he's had some decent moments this year. I was thinking about him. What about you, Joel?
Sean O'Hara was interesting. He's been 7th and 12th in his last 2 starts. He was tied 10th here 2 years ago. It seems to be getting some of his form back. And J.D. Holmes, I consider, he's a former winner, and his game's a decent fit for. But wow, he has been so bad outside of that one tournament where he upset everyone with icing Noren. So I couldn't quite pull the trigger on him. Anytime you see Martin Keimer at triple-digit odds, that's worth a little consideration too. And also, Peter Uihlein I thought looked okay last week, 125-1 odds.
Yeah, strange in this field to see Keimer down there at 100-1, especially since in his last when he was coming to the PGA Tour events, he had 6 straight top 30s over in Europe. But maybe it's because of what withdrew him from Honda. Maybe they're just nobody's sure about his health conditions. I mean, has anybody heard anything about why he withdrew from Honda? Anything with Martin Keimer?
I have not. Have you, Joel?
I have not either.
All right. Jeff, anybody else you kept off?
Let me go back to what I was looking at. Martin Keimer, by the way, wrist injury. That's his weakness right now. Thought about Thomas Pieters. I think that, he's such an enigma. You don't know when he's going to show up, but he played well at Augusta. This is supposed to be set up like Augusta, so that was one. Sharma was somebody that I was looking at. Uihlein, I agree with Joel. I liked what he put together last week, and maybe just somebody that impressed me, but he's still kind of working his way into getting back on U.S. soil, taking the Peter Uihlein, Brooks Koepka route. But Julian Surrey, I thought, had a very good first World Golf Championships event.
All right, so
he half to ball Medeni. That was pretty good accomplishment in retrospect.
All right,
absolutely.
So next week, it is going to be our Masters coverage, and again, Masters coverage is going to be Tuesday, Saturday, and Sunday. So we're going to be on the air Tuesday to preview the Masters like we do every week, every event. Then we're going to be back on the air after the cut. So that is going to be on Saturday to get you ready for the third round. And then we're going to be on the air on Sunday morning to get you ready for the final round. So that is going to be our 3 shows next week to cover the Masters, including the preview next Tuesday. And by the way, if your player is trailing in this week's event, don't fret, because only one of the last 6 final round leaders have won, and that was Herman. So if you're leading going into the final round in Houston over the last 6 years, chances are you're not going to win. So keep that in mind if your player is not leading going into the final round this week in Houston. And that is going to wrap it up. So we are going to see you again next Tuesday for Masters coverage. We're looking forward to it. Should be pretty awesome. It's a big week for us here on Prime Sports Golf. Don't forget to check out experts.covers.com and get that 50% off purchase by using promo code PRIME50. That's PRIME50. And, of course, also go to UWager on our website to place a wager either this week at Houston or at the Masters. And just got to click on the banner here on our website. So we'll see you next week here on Prime Sports Golf on the Prime Sports Radio Network. For Brady Cannon, Joel Cook, Jeff Shane, I'm Greg DePalma. And it's Masters Week next week. We'll see you then. Take its toll if you could. I think a switch and open your third eye.